Let's go back, far back, to a time when the world was quieter. Before the cities buzzed with machines, before lights drowned out the night sky, before science could explain the things people whispered about around fires. The year is 966 AD. The stars above Greenland are endless and silent, but something stirs among them, something strange. In a small Viking settlement near the edge of the frozen sea, the sky was a map of stories. One cold evening, as the villagers settled in their huts wrapped in furs, the northern lights began to shimmer, green and red curtains rippling across the black sky. But that night, something else appeared. Among the dancing lights, a shape. It didn't move like a star or a planet. It hovered, still, glowing a soft blue. Then it darted impossibly fast across the horizon and was gone. The people spoke of it as a spirit, a watcher, perhaps even a god. The tale was passed on in quiet voices, never written down, but something about that night stayed with them. An odd silence followed, as if the sky had noticed them. Further south, across oceans and mountains, the Maya of Central America were watching the heavens too. Theirs was a culture of time and stars, deeply connected to the cycles above. In their codices, folded books made from bark and covered in glyphs, there are drawings of long, snake-like creatures descending from the sky. One such image shows a serpent, but not one that moves along the ground. This one glides downward, surrounded by bursts of light. Some believed it was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, but others, even now, suggest it was something else. A memory of a visitor, a shape in the sky no one could name. These codices tell stories of sky beings, of glowing ovals descending in silence, of gods who arrived from the heavens and brought knowledge. The ancient cities of the Maya, places like Palenque and Tikal, are built with eerie precision, aligned with stars, solstices and constellations. Were they guided by something more than mathematics, or were they simply listening to the sky, trying to understand what they saw? In the Islamic world, between the deserts and the domed cities of the Golden Age, astronomy was flourishing. Scholars gathered under moonlight, charting the stars with tools far ahead of their time. Baghdad, Cordoba and Cairo became centres of knowledge, but not everything they recorded made perfect sense. Some early manuscripts refer to moving stars that change direction suddenly. Others describe lamps of fire seen in the sky, circling slowly, noiselessly. While much of Islamic writing was grounded in logic and science, these passages stood out, soft echoes of things that didn't fit neatly into equations. A scholar named Al-Kindi once wrote of hidden knowledge in the firmament, and described lights that speak not with words, but with wonder. His tone was poetic, cautious, but curious. In the stillness of ancient observatories, under domes that framed the stars, men watched and waited. Some believed the sky had a language, a way of telling us we're not alone. Even further back in time, though still whispered in the years after 966, were the stories carved into rock. In deserts and caves across the world, ancient people left behind images that challenge explanation. Petroglyphs in Australia, South America, and parts of Europe show tall figures with large, round heads and almond-shaped eyes. Some have rays coming from their heads. Others appear to wear helmets. These were long before any astronaut existed, before suits or science fiction. Some of these cave drawings show beings floating or surrounded by shapes that look eerily like discs, ovals, or even beams. The artists are long gone. Their meanings are lost. But why would a person, so many thousands of years ago, paint something like that? What did they see? Or dream of? Were they visited? Or were they simply imagining? In a cave in northern Italy, there's a painting over 10,000 years old that shows two figures with what look like antennas. Around them, shapes that might be shields, or maybe something more. In Val Camonica, petroglyphs stretch across rocks like a language of pictures. Among them are strange figures, human, but not quite. The locals today say they're just myths, symbols of gods or spirits. But the resemblance to modern ideas of visitors is hard to ignore. All across the world, different cultures that had no contact with one another left behind similar signs. Beings from the sky, lights that moved strangely, moments that made people stop and look up. This was a time before aliens existed as an idea. These were not stories of flying saucers or grey beings. These were encounters with the unknown, things that humans tried to explain the only way they could, with myth, with gods, with symbols. As we drift through these early centuries from the year 966 to the end of the 1400s, there's a quiet feeling that repeats. People are watching the sky, people wondering, people remember what they saw and try to pass it on. Through firelight stories, through songs, through symbols carved into stone. Maybe they were visited, or maybe they only dreamed. But as the centuries passed, the stories became more frequent. The sky, it seemed, had more to say. And so we move forward into a new age of whispers and wings. As time moved forward, the night sky remained just as mysterious. Between the years 1500 and 1700, the world was changing fast. Great ships were sailing across oceans. New lands were being discovered by people who thought they already knew everything. But even as maps filled with coastlines and cities, the stars above still held secrets no one could claim. In Europe, the Renaissance was blooming. Artists were painting with a passion that the world hadn't seen in centuries. Their hands shaped beauty, their eyes studied the sky, and their minds were full of questions. It was during this time that something odd began to appear in art. Not in every painting, and not loudly but quietly, as if the artist had slipped it in for only the careful observer to notice. In a fresco painted in 1350, later viewed widely during the Renaissance, two objects hover in the background of the crucifixion of Christ. These shapes are not angels. They are round, with fire at the base. One seems to have a pilot inside, looking back over their shoulder. Art historians often explain these as symbolic, maybe representations of divine presence. But they don't look like halos. They don't look like clouds. They look like machines. In another painting, the Madonna with St. Giovannino, there's a clear image of a circular object floating in the sky behind Mary's shoulder. A man below it is shielding his eyes, staring directly at it. His dog is barking. It's not large, and it's not in the centre of the painting, but it's there. Unmistakable. A silver disc with light shining from it. What was the artist trying to show us? Of course, back then there were no words for things like spaceships, so the people called them angels, stars, messengers. But maybe they were something else. Maybe what they called angels were visitors, and maybe these artists were painting not only what they believed but what they saw. Far across the sea, in the wide lands of North America, stories were being passed down from tribe to tribe. These were not written in books or painted on canvas, but told around campfires, whispered from one generation to the next. Among the Zuni, the Hopi, and other native tribes, there are legends of the Star People. The Star People were not gods exactly, but they came from the sky. They were described as tall, peaceful, and glowing. They taught the tribes new things, about planting, about healing, about the stars. Then, just as gently they would leave, returning to the sky, promising to come back someday. These weren't stories of war or fear. They were soft tales, filled with wonder. Among the Lakota Sioux, there is the legend of a beautiful woman who came from the stars. She brought a sacred pipe and taught the people about prayer and peace. She stayed with them for a time, then turned into a white buffalo and disappeared into the sky. The people remembered her. They still do, and they say she'll return. It's hard to say where these stories came from. Maybe they were myths, or maybe, just maybe, someone came down from the sky long ago, and the memory lived on, wrapped in stories, safe in the hearts of the people. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, another strange tale was unfolding, this one in Japan. The year was 1803, just outside of our window for this chapter, but the story belongs with the whispers of this time. On the eastern coast of Japan, fishermen spotted something strange in the waves. A small, round vessel shaped like a bowl floating near the shore. Inside was a woman with red and white hair, holding a box she would not let go of. She didn't speak Japanese. Her clothes were strange. Her ship, called Tsurobune, or hollow boat, was covered in writing that the people couldn't understand. They brought her inland, confused and curious, but soon sent her back to sea, afraid of what they didn't know. The tale was recorded in local writings, almost like a news report. Scholars of the time puzzled over it, unsure what to make of the strange woman and her round boat. Some said it was a warning. Others believed she was from another world. Back in Europe, as the age of magic slowly gave way to science, there were still people who lived between the two worlds. Alchemists, they were called. They worked in secret, mixing strange powders, drawing symbols and trying to turn metal into gold. But some of them were searching for more than gold. They were listening to the stars. In dusty libraries and candlelit studies, alchemists wrote of sky brethren. They described beings who watched Earth from above, not with anger, but with quiet attention. One alchemist wrote of a dream where a man of silver light showed him how to build a machine that could float like the stars. Another recorded a voice that spoke through mirrors, telling of a distant place where Earth was just one garden among many. Were these the dreams of men too lost in their thoughts? Or were they glimpses of something real, something just out of reach? What's strange is that these writings, scattered across Europe, often shared the same details, the same shapes, the same lights, the same message. We're not alone. These voices were not loud. They were quiet, like murmurs in a cathedral, a flicker at the edge of a candle's glow. But they were there, from the soaring ceilings of Renaissance churches to the star-marked drums of the Hopi, from the mystery woman in Japan to the silver dreams of the alchemists. Something was reaching out, gently, carefully, as if testing the waters of our world. And as people looked up at the sky, or painted their visions onto walls, or whispered stories by firelight, a pattern began to form, one that would grow louder with each century. Not every tale is proof, not every drawing is the truth, but perhaps, just perhaps, they are pieces of a puzzle, and in the soft silence of sleep we are free to wonder about the spaces in between. Now, let's move gently onward, into the next age of watching eyes and whispered stars. As we gently drift into the 1700s, the world is entering a new chapter. It is the age of enlightenment, a time of great thinking, of new questions, and of brave answers. Candles burn long into the night, as scholars in powdered wigs read books by moonlight. Ideas about freedom, science, and discovery float through the air like the scent of old paper and fresh ink. But even in this age of reason and careful logic, something strange remains. People are still looking up at the sky and wondering what those lights truly are. During this time, scientists and philosophers were debating something they dared not speak of too loudly: life on other worlds. Telescopes were improving, and careful eyes had seen the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. The sky was no longer just a dome of lights. It was a vast ocean, full of other places, spinning slowly in the dark. And if Earth were not the only world, then perhaps we were not the only beings. French thinkers like Voltaire suggested that other planets might have their own people, beings with thoughts, dreams, even families. They asked, why would the Creator make so many stars and only fill one with life? It was a quiet question, one hidden in essays and letters, but it was spreading. Some called it fantasy, others called it dangerous. But a few began to believe that Earth was not truly alone. In England, scientists spoke of plurality of worlds, a phrase that meant many planets, many chances for life. Books were written that described entire civilizations on the Moon or Mars. These weren't meant as science fiction. They were guesses, dreams wrapped in logic. A way of saying, maybe we're part of something bigger. And as the questions grew, so did the sightings. Astronomers, those patient people who watched the sky every night, began reporting odd things. Lights that did not follow the stars, movements that made no sense. These weren't comets or meteors which moved in clear paths. These were what they called wandering stars. They would appear suddenly, hover in place, then vanish. Some left glowing trails behind them, others blinked, like eyes opening and closing in the dark. One observer in Germany noted a bright object that danced across the sky, then stopped completely for several minutes before continuing again. He wrote that it was as though the star were thinking. Another, in Italy, drew diagrams of two objects spinning around each other like partners in a dance. He had no words for what he saw, so he called them heavenly visitors. These events were recorded, but not widely shared. In a world built on logic, these things did not fit. And yet, they continued. Across the sea in the American colonies, a familiar name enters our story: Benjamin Franklin. Known for his kites and his keys, Franklin was a man of many interests. He was curious about electricity, weather, and even the stars. In his writings, he once wondered if the stars were suns to their own worlds, and asked if perhaps those worlds also had thinking beings. He said we should not be so proud as to believe we are the only ones. It was a gentle thought, written between pages about farming and politics, but it showed that even the brightest minds of the age still gazed upward with wonder. Franklin also noted something else, something darker. He spoke of people who vanished during storms or after strange lights were seen in the sky. He never claimed to know why, but he collected these stories with care, as if he thought there was a thread tying them together. And then came the comets. In the late 1700s, a comet was seen across Europe, bright, long-tailed and slow-moving. People panicked. Some believed it meant the end of the world. Others said it was a sign from the heavens. But in one small town in France, something else happened. After the comet passed overhead, villagers reported a series of strange sounds during the night. Low hums like distant thunder, and then a child disappeared. No trace was found, no scream, no struggle, only a strange round mark in the soft earth where she had been playing earlier that day. It looked like a circle had been burned into the grass. The village priest said it was punishment from God. The mayor said it was wolves. But the child's mother whispered something different. She said the girl had been talking for weeks about the round people who visited her in dreams. The townspeople told her to stop speaking such nonsense. But the story lingered. This was not the only tale of vanishing. In parts of rural England, farmers reported bright lights hovering over their fields at dusk. After these visits, small items would go missing: tools, food, even a goat. Always without sound. One man claimed he saw a metal shape land near his home. He approached it, but before he could get close it disappeared in a flash. He was found the next morning unharmed, but unable to speak for days, his eyes wide with fear. He never told the full story, only repeating one word: watching. In these years, science was pulling people forward. Machines were being built, cities were growing, and ideas were rising like steam from the ground. But behind it all, there was still the silence of the stars. And in that silence, some people saw movement, glimpses of something beyond reason. The thinkers of the Enlightenment gave us many gifts: freedom, invention, the beginning of modern science. But they also gave us something else: the courage to wonder, to ask questions without needing answers right away. And in the quiet spaces between their discoveries, stories of visitors from the sky continued to take shape. Were these visitors real? No one could say. But the stories kept coming, and they sounded strangely alike. across countries, across languages, the same shapes, the same lights, the same feelings of being watched, of being chosen, of not being alone. As the 1700s drew to a close, the world stood on the edge of a new century. The machines were getting louder, the cities were burning brighter. But in the deep night, when all was still, the stars told a different story. One that whispered, softly, "We are not the only ones who look up." And so, the shadows of the Enlightenment remain, gentle, thoughtful, and full of mystery. The 1800s were a time of smoke, steel, and steam. The world was changing faster than ever before. Trains cut across the countryside, factories hummed with machines, and new inventions appeared with every season. It was the age of progress. People believed that with science and hard work they could understand everything. But in the shadows of this progress, something strange was still happening. Quiet stories continued about lights in the sky, figures in the dark and whispers from places unknown. One of the oddest stories from this time came from the skies over Victorian England and America. These were the days of the horse-drawn carriage, the steam engine, and the first flickers of electricity. And yet, in the night sky, people began seeing things they could not explain. Flying objects, silent and glowing, shaped like ships. They were called airships, even though no such crafts had been invented yet. These weren't balloons or blimps. Witnesses described long metallic vessels with bright lights, and sometimes even glass windows. They floated slowly overhead, often without a sound. In 1896 and 1897, hundreds of people across the United States reported these sightings. From California to the Midwest, the same details came up again and again. Some people even claimed to see figures inside the ships, tall, thin people with large eyes. Others said the crafts landed briefly in fields, only to rise again and vanish. Newspapers covered the stories, calling them hoaxes or dreams, but the witnesses were many, and they all seemed very sure of what they saw. In Texas, a story emerged of one of these ships crashing in a small town called Aurora. The tale said a strange being was found inside the wreck, and the townspeople buried it in the local cemetery. The grave is still there, though the marker is long gone. Some believe the story was invented. Others aren't so sure. As railroads spread across the land, another pattern began. Workers, many of them immigrants, would speak in hushed tones about things seen, while laying tracks through forests and hills, lights that followed them, tools that vanished, shadows that moved without people. Sometimes a man would go missing, gone overnight with no sign of struggle. The official reports blamed wolves or desertion, but among the workers another explanation was whispered. Something was watching, something from above. These workers had no books, no science to explain it, just their eyes, their fear, and their stories. And so these strange disappearances were folded into folklore, shared around campfires on cold nights. At the same time, in the quiet salons of spiritual thinkers, another kind of story was being told. A movement called theosophy was growing. It blended old religions, new science, and a belief that humans could connect with other worlds, not just spiritually, but truly. Theosophists believed in ancient wisdom, lost civilizations and beings from other planets. They spoke of ascended masters and lords of the flame, who came to Earth in glowing vehicles. One of the founders, Helena Blavatsky, claimed that great teachers had visited Earth long ago and left behind secret knowledge. She wrote of messages received from beings of light and entities from the stars. To many, her ideas sounded like dreams or poetry, but she had followers, and their writings planted early seeds of what we now call alien contact. They didn't speak of aliens exactly, not in the way we do today, but they talked of visitors, messages, and strange energy from far away. A soft idea was beginning to form, gentle as a breeze. Maybe we weren't just watching. Maybe we were being spoken to. One man who may have heard something was Nikola Tesla. Tesla was not like other inventors. While others built machines with noise and fire, he worked with invisible energy. He gave us ideas we still use today: radio, wireless power, even the spark behind today's electric world. But Tesla also claimed to hear something unexpected. In 1899, while experimenting with a high-powered radio in Colorado Springs, Tesla picked up a signal. It was rhythmic, repeating, not like anything he'd heard before. He believed it was not from Earth. He wrote, "I feel as though I were present at the birth of a new knowledge." He was cautious but curious. Was it a signal from another planet? Was someone out there trying to speak? Years later, he said more. He believed the Martians were trying to reach us. He spoke of messages in patterns waiting to be understood. Many laughed at him. Others called him mad. But Tesla never stopped believing that he had heard something real. In the last years of the 1800s, as trains roared and factories glowed, the strange and the silent still crept in at the edges. The skies above were busy with smoke, but also with quiet visitors. The earth was louder than ever, but if you stopped and listened, you could still hear the whispers. And so the century closed, not with answers, but with more questions. The gear and the ghost, the machine and the mystery, the grey-eyed figure seen through a window in the sky. As the 20th century began, the world was full of noise and excitement. Cars were replacing horses, radios were humming in living rooms, telephones were connecting voices across cities, and airplanes, for the very first time, were starting to rise into the sky. The air was no longer quiet, and with this new century came a new kind of curiosity, a growing fascination with the stars above, and what might be hiding in them. This was also the time when stories about life beyond Earth began to change. In the centuries before, such stories had been full of gods, spirits, and magical sky people. But now, thanks to books and newspapers and early cinema, the word alien was starting to appear. People were beginning to imagine not just beings from heaven, but from other planets. In 1898, just before the century began, H.G. Wells published The War of the Worlds. It told the story of Martians invading Earth. These weren't friendly visitors. They were machines, intelligent and powerful, arriving with smoke and fire. The book caused fear and wonder, and it planted a seed. Suddenly, the idea of life on other planets was no longer just myth or religious thought. It was something people could picture, talk about, and even fear. As the years moved into the 1920s and 1930s, more science fiction stories appeared in magazines and radio shows. Many of them were dramatic and filled with action. But mixed in with the excitement were quiet echoes of something else, something that felt possible. In these stories, aliens didn't just attack, they observed, they studied. They visited Earth quietly, in the middle of the night, and sometimes left strange things behind. By the 1930s, people around the world began to report strange lights in the sky. In the American Midwest, farmers would stop their tractors and point toward flickering shapes that darted across the horizon. They called them sky flares. These lights didn't behave like stars or planets. They didn't follow any known flight path. Some hovered in place. Some made sudden turns, moves that no aeroplane could perform. In New Mexico and Arizona, people saw what they called green fireballs. They would flash across the night sky, glowing bright emerald, then vanish without a sound. Scientists at the time called them meteors, but witnesses said the lights didn't fall. They flew. They moved like something alive, aware, even watching. At first, these stories stayed small. They were printed in local papers, passed from neighbour to neighbour. But over time, patterns began to form. The same shapes, the same colours, the same strange feeling left behind. A feeling that something had been near, but left no trace. Then came World War II. As planes roared across Europe and the Pacific, pilots began to see something no one could explain. While flying missions, often at night, they spotted glowing orbs following their planes, sometimes red, sometimes white, sometimes bright orange like a small sun. These lights would fly alongside the aircraft for miles, keeping perfect pace, then suddenly dart away or disappear. The pilots gave them a name: Foo Fighters. It was a strange term, borrowed from a comic strip, but it stuck. At first, the soldiers thought the lights were secret weapons from the enemy, but then they learned that both sides were seeing the same thing. American pilots saw them, German pilots saw them, Japanese pilots saw them, and none of them had any idea what they were. The lights didn't attack, they didn't crash, they didn't make a sound, they just watched. Military reports were written, meetings were held, but no one had an answer, and when the war ended, the Foo Fighters quietly disappeared, as if their job, whatever it had been, was finished. After the war, something shifted. The world was quiet again, but the skies were still being watched, not just by stargazers and dreamers, but by governments. In secret rooms behind locked doors, people began to talk about the sightings, not as myths, not as wild stories, but as data, as facts. One name began to appear in whispers: Majestic 12. According to some documents, this was a group of high-ranking officials, military officers, scientists and government advisors brought together by the US government. Their job: to investigate the possibility that we were being visited by something not human. These documents were never meant for the public, but copies were leaked years later. Some believe they're real, others say they're fakes, but the stories they tell are strangely detailed, about crashed objects, recovered materials, and even beings who did not come from Earth. There is mention of a crash in the American Southwest, of a recovery team, of something found that was not a balloon or a plane or anything built by human hands, and most of all, of a decision to keep it secret, from folklore to files. The stories of visitors had moved from paintings and legends to typed reports and sealed folders, and all of this was happening just before a small town in New Mexico would become the centre of one of the most famous stories in UFO history, a town called Roswell. But that's for the next part of our journey. For now, as the year turns to 1947, we pause. The world is quiet, but full of questions. The stars are still watching, and somewhere out there, something may be watching back. It begins, as many stories do, in the quiet of a desert. The year is 1947. The place is Roswell, New Mexico. It is a small town surrounded by sand and sky, the kind of place where the wind carries old stories and everyone knows each other's name. On a quiet July day, something fell from the sky. A local rancher found strange debris on his land, shiny, light pieces of something that didn't feel like metal and couldn't be burned or bent. There were markings too, symbols no one could understand, he told the local sheriff. The sheriff called the military, and for one brief moment the story made the news. The US Army had recovered a flying disc. That was the first headline. But just one day later, a second message was sent out. The military changed the story. It wasn't a disc after all, they said. It was a weather balloon. Nothing strange, nothing special, nothing to see. The newspapers followed that version, and just like that, the story faded for a while. But people in Roswell remembered. The rancher remembered, and others in town said they had seen more. Lights in the sky, trucks carrying strange cargo, silence from officials. Something about it didn't feel right. Over the years, the story of Roswell grew. It became more than a town. It became a question. What really happened in that desert? What was found and what was hidden? Some said the government was telling the truth, just a balloon, a misunderstanding. Others believed it was something else, a crash, a recovery, maybe even a visitor. And just as the Roswell story settled into the background, something new entered the picture. A place called Area 51. This was not a place on most maps. Deep in the Nevada desert, far from towns or highways, the US government built a facility. They said it was for aircraft testing. And maybe it was. But people began to notice strange things near the site. Lights that moved too quickly, shapes that weren't planes, faint hums in the night. It became the centre of rumours, a black site, a place where secret things were tested and maybe stored. Some believed wreckage from Roswell was taken there. Others said it was home to more than just machines, that beings, not of this earth, had been brought there too. The government said nothing. The silence only made the stories grow. At the same time, people across the country and around the world were still seeing things in the sky. Discs, ovals, bright objects that changed direction without turning, lights that hovered, then shot away. The sightings were too many to ignore. So in 1952, the US Air Force created a special program, Project Blue Book. Its job was to collect reports, study them, and explain them. For 17 years, Project Blue Book investigated thousands of cases. Some were explained easily, like planes, stars, and balloons, but not all of them. A small number remained unexplained. Still, the official line was always simple. There was no threat, no visitors, no reason to worry. The most common explanation given was weather balloons. Again and again, a safe, quiet answer. And maybe, sometimes it was true. But to the people who had seen something up close, who had felt that strange electric feeling in the air, it didn't feel like the full truth. Still, the message was clear. Don't ask. Don't wonder. Don't believe too much. But while the officials stayed quiet, another group began to speak more loudly, the contactees. In the 1950s and 1960s, a wave of people came forward saying they had made contact. Not just sightings, but actual meetings. They spoke of tall, gentle beings, often described as beautiful, glowing, almost angelic. These visitors came not with weapons, but with warnings. They said Earth was in danger, not from them, but from ourselves. From our wars, our bombs, our pollution. And they wanted to help. These space brothers, as they were often called, were peaceful and wise. They came from Venus, or Mars, or star systems far away. The messages were usually delivered through dreams, visions, or even telepathy. Some contactees said they were taken aboard ships and shown visions of Earth's possible future, some bright, some very dark. To many people, these stories were comforting. They gave hope. Others laughed at them, called them delusions, but the contactees believed. They spoke at gatherings, they wrote books, and they waited for the visitors to return. One of the most famous contactees, George Adamski, said he met a being named Orthon from Venus. He described him as tall, with long blonde hair, wearing a suit that shimmered like metal. Orthon warned about the use of nuclear weapons. He said that Earth was watched, not for conquest, but out of care. Adamski's photos of UFOs were both praised and questioned. His followers grew. And so did the idea that aliens might not be a threat, but a lesson. It was a time of strange balance. On one side, government files and silence. On the other, glowing beings and open messages. In the middle, the people are watching, wondering, trying to decide what to believe. As the 1960s moved on, interest in space was growing. Humans were getting ready to walk on the moon. Rockets roared into the sky. And yet, the questions about what might already be out there, visiting us, were quietly pushed aside. Project Blue Book ended in 1969. Its final report said there was no evidence of aliens, that none of the sightings were threats, that everything could be explained, and with that, the curtain seemed to close. But the stories didn't stop. They only went quiet. In the years to come, the whispers would return, but for now, the world entered a new kind of silence, the kind that feels like a pause, the kind that comes just before something changes. The 1970s arrived with a strange kind of silence, The world was split into two sides, east and west, locked in a quiet war that wasn't fought with bullets, but with secrets, spies, and space. This was the Cold War, a time of tension and quiet fear. People looked to the skies, not just for weather or stars or dreams, but for rockets, missiles, satellites. The sky was full now, but something else still moved in the dark, something older than politics. In this time of competition, the United States and the Soviet Union raced to the moon. They built spacecraft, they trained astronauts, they pushed toward the stars. But beneath all this hope and progress was a quiet unease, an unspoken question. Were we truly alone out there? Because as humans reached for the sky, something else seemed to be coming down. Reports of UFOs did not stop with the end of Project Blue Book. If anything, they grew. Sightings came in from farms, highways, suburbs, and cities. People described the same glowing shapes, the same low hum, the same sudden silence before the craft appeared, and sometimes the same strange feeling, like being watched from the inside out. But there was something new, something darker. It began with cattle. In the early 1970s, farmers across the American Midwest and Southwest began finding their animals dead. Not just dead, but mutilated. The corpses had clean, bloodless cuts, organs removed with surgical precision, eyes gone, tongues missing. But no blood, no tracks, no predators, nothing. Some thought it was cults, others blamed wild animals, though none left a mess behind. And then there were the lights. Farmers reported strange objects hovering over their fields at night, bright, silent, sometimes shining beams of light onto the ground. When the lights left, they would find a dead animal the next morning. The pattern repeated across states, Colorado, New Mexico, Kansas, and more. Sheriffs looked into it. Some brought in veterinarians. One sheriff in Colorado said, "These cuts are not made by knives. They are made by something far more advanced." The FBI was contacted, but their investigations quietly faded. No answers were given, no arrests, just more silence. These weren't stories meant to entertain. They were filed as police reports, official, documented, and yet nothing was done. The events slowed, but they never really stopped. They simply moved into the background, and while the farms faced the unknown, so did people on lonely roads. One of the most famous stories of this time was that of Betty and Barney Hill. Their experience happened in 1961, but it became widely known during the 1970s. It changed how people talked about alien encounters. Betty and Barney were a quiet couple from New Hampshire. They were driving home late one night when they saw a strange light in the sky. At first it looked like a star, but it moved. It followed them. Then it got closer, much closer. They described a craft hovering above their car, lights spinning, windows, beings inside. Then came the missing time. They arrived home 2 hours later than they should have. They didn't remember what happened during that gap, but they felt strange. Barney's shoes were scuffed. Betty's dress was torn. They both had odd dreams in the weeks that followed. Eventually they sought help. Under hypnosis, they both told the same story. They had been taken aboard a ship. They described small grey beings with large heads and dark eyes. They said the beings performed medical tests, took samples, spoke without words. Their story was calm, not panicked. Strange, but detailed. Many believed them, others did not. But the idea had taken hold. Abduction. Suddenly, other people began to share similar stories. Men and women across the world said they had been taken, usually at night, often while driving or sleeping. The details were always similar. The ship, the greys, the tests, and the return confused, missing time, strange marks on the body. Psychologists studied the cases. Some called them dreams, some called them shared trauma. But the stories kept coming, quiet, detailed, and always the same. As more people came forward, governments began to pay attention again. The official word was still denial. No aliens, no ships, no concern. But behind closed doors, things were less clear. Reports suggest that both the US and Soviet governments took the sightings seriously. That intelligence groups collected data, that satellites were pointed at strange objects, that pilots were told to report but not to speak publicly. There were rumours of meetings, of silent agreements, of wreckage stored far away from public eyes, of recovered material that didn't belong to any known country or any known time. But always the answer was the same. Nothing to see. Move along. In this time a pattern formed. Someone sees something. The event is reported, the story spreads, then it vanishes, hidden under explanations, weather balloons, optical illusions, misunderstandings. It became known as the truth curtain, not a wall, not a lie, but a thick, heavy curtain of words that kept people from looking too closely. Behind that curtain, maybe something waited, and so, the 1980s rolled on, a time of movies, music, and the rise of technology. But the strange stories didn't stop. A retired US Army colonel said he had been part of a team that studied alien bodies. A British base in Rendlesham Forest became the centre of a sighting that still has no clear explanation. Lights in the trees, burn marks on the ground, a note written by a soldier in shaking hands. Through it all, governments either stayed silent or smiled and said nothing was wrong, and perhaps for many people that was enough. Life went on, bills to pay, children to raise. But at night, when the world grew still, some people still looked up and wondered, what were those lights? Who were those beings? And why had they come? As the Cold War neared its end, the world changed once more. Borders shifted, walls fell, and the curtain perhaps began to lift just slightly, but only slightly. The world changed in the 1990s. Not all at once, but slowly, like a page turning in the dark. Computers came into homes. The internet began to spread, quiet at first, with soft beeps and blinking screens. What had once been whispers in small towns and classified reports now had a new place to live online. Before this time, if you saw something strange in the sky, you might tell a friend or maybe a newspaper. But now, you could tell the world. People began sharing stories on message boards and forums. Websites popped up with photos, reports and theories. It was a new kind of storytelling, not told by experts or hidden in government folders, but by regular people. People who saw something, or heard something, or just felt that something wasn't quite right. Late at night, people would gather around glowing screens, reading, posting, wondering. They weren't alone anymore. They were part of something bigger. One radio show captured this feeling perfectly. It was called Coast to Coast. Hosted by a calm, curious man named Art Bell, it aired late into the night. The show talked about ghosts, time travel, and most often, aliens. People would call in from across the country. Truck drivers, farmers, teachers, retired soldiers. They shared stories of lights in the sky, of abductions, of government silence. The tone was always calm, never rushed. It was a place where stories were heard, not judged. A place for the quiet ones. Another platform called Project Camelot focused on interviews with whistleblowers, people who claimed to have worked on secret projects, seen classified files, or even met beings not of this earth. These interviews were long, sometimes rambling, sometimes unclear, but always interesting. One by one, people began stepping forward. Some said they had worked at Area 51, that they saw crafts being tested, not human crafts, that materials were being studied, that questions were being asked behind thick walls and locked doors. Some brought photos, others shared blurry footage, a few released documents. Most of it was hard to prove, some was probably made up. but buried within all the noise there were patterns, details that matched older stories, words that had been spoken before. In 1997, something happened that even the skeptics couldn't ignore. It was called the Phoenix Lights. On a clear evening in March, thousands of people across Arizona looked up and saw something strange. A large V-shaped formation of lights moving silently across the sky. Some said it was a mile wide. Others said it hovered right above them. It was completely silent. No engine, no sound, just lights. This sighting stretched across hundreds of miles, from Prescott to Phoenix. Entire neighborhoods stood outside, watching together. Some took videos, others drew what they saw. At first the military said nothing, then they said it was flares. But the people who saw it didn't agree. They knew what flares looked like. This was different, slower, more organised, more real. Even the governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, who once made light of the event, later admitted he had seen the lights too, and believed they were not from Earth. The Phoenix Lights changed something. It was no longer just a story told by one person in the middle of nowhere. It was seen by thousands, and while the news covered it for a while, the full story faded, as usual, but people remembered, and many kept looking. During this time, a television show arrived that would change how many people thought about ancient myths. It was called Ancient Aliens. First aired in 2009, it combined archaeology, history, and UFO theory. It asked questions like, what if the gods in old stories weren't gods at all, but visitors? The show looked at pyramids, cave paintings, and ancient texts. It pointed to strange art, odd structures, things that seemed too advanced for the time, and it suggested gently that maybe we had been helped, not conquered, just visited. Some called the show silly, others found it fascinating, but it brought old stories back to life and gave them a new meaning. It blended myth with modern mystery, the past and the present, and it made the strange feel close. People began rereading old legends, looking at old carvings, wondering if maybe, just maybe, the stories told by ancient people were more literal than symbolic. Visitors from the sky, beings of light, discs of fire. It all sounded familiar. By the end of the 2000s, the internet was everywhere. Videos of sightings were being uploaded daily, some clear, most not. But they were out there, and people were watching. Governments still said little. Some documents were declassified, some programs admitted. But the full truth, whatever it was, remained just out of reach. Still, something had shifted. The story was no longer hidden in shadows. It was open, discussed, shared. It wasn't just a story about visitors. It was a story about us, our past, our future, our place in something much bigger. And now, as you lay here, listening to this quiet story in the dark, you might feel your own questions rising. Not in fear, but in calm curiosity. Maybe you're not trying to find answers. Maybe you're just letting the story drift around you, like a soft breeze. Let your eyes grow heavier now. Let your breath slow. The sky is vast, but you are safe here. The digital age brought many voices, many theories, but tonight, none of that matters. Only the slow rhythm of your breath, the soft pull of sleep, and the gentle thought that the universe is big, mysterious, and maybe just a little bit awake. The lights are out now, the sky is still, and you are finally sleeping. Good night,